What if everything we thought we knew about Prince Harry was a lie? Not just the stories, not just the rumors, but the very blood in his veins? Because moments ago, yes, just minutes before this video began recording, the palace confirmed something no one ever expected to hear. A truth so seismic, so destabilizing, so utterly unthinkable, it could rewrite the royal family's entire legacy. And it all starts with one simple, undeniable fact. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Prince Harry may not be royal. You heard that correctly. Not by scandal, not by title, not even by choice, but by DNA. A quiet, clinical truth, decades in the making, and now, confirmed in the most reluctant of ways by the very institution that spent years, maybe even decades, trying to bury it. But how did we get here? How did we go from fairy tale weddings and royal tours to whispers of genetic tests and paternity secrets? How did Harry, the boy we saw walk behind his mother's coffin, the rebellious teen turned war hero, the rogue prince turned exile, end up at the center of a bloodline crisis so catastrophic, Buckingham Palace itself has been forced to confront it? This isn't fiction. This isn't speculation. This is a reckoning. Because this story didn't just begin today. No, the seeds were planted long ago. Through shadowy whispers, offhand comments, vanished documents, and a single name that kept rising from the ashes of silence like a ghost the royals couldn't exorcise. And yet they tried. They really tried. For years, every time the rumor would resurface that Prince Harry might not be the biological son of King Charles, Buckingham Palace would tighten its grip. Denials, legal threats, strategic distractions, but never a definitive rebuttal. Why? Why not put it to rest once and for all? Because somewhere, behind the stone walls and the velvet curtains, behind the gilded titles and carefully staged photos, someone knew that opening that particular vault could collapse the entire monarchy's foundation. And now it has. So why now? Why did the palace choose this moment, this precise point in time, to issue a statement that stops just short of full confirmation, but speaks volumes through what it doesn't deny? And more importantly, what forced their hand? To answer that, we need to go back, not just to the wedding, not just to the Megxit, but further, back to 1984, back to Diana, back to a timeline riddled with contradictions, and a child born into chaos, grief, and unanswered questions. Because if the timeline is wrong, if the father is wrong, then what else have we been lied to about? And here's the twist. This story doesn't just involve Harry. It involves a letter. It involves a DNA file. It involves a man Diana knew long before the public ever learned his name. And it involves a son, now a father himself, whose very identity is hanging by a thread. You think you know the story. You don't. Because buried beneath the public narrative lies something else entirely, a private war. Not between brothers, not between wives, but between truth and legacy. And in this war, no one comes out clean. Not Charles, not Diana, not Harry, not even the monarchy itself. Because this isn't just a scandal. This is a lineage crisis. And what we've uncovered goes far deeper than a few blurry tabloid photos or late-night rumors. It's a breadcrumb trail that leads straight to the palace's most guarded secrets. And now, those secrets are spilling into the light. But first, ask yourself this. Have you ever wondered why Prince Harry has always seemed like an outsider? Why he often joked about not belonging? Why, even when he was still a working royal, he looked more like an observer than a participant? Why his red hair, his rebellious nature, his emotional distance from Charles always made him feel different? Is it possible that even he suspected something? That deep down, he knew something wasn't right? Think back to the interviews, the memoir, the hints, the silences. Because Harry may have dropped clues all along. But it's only now, after a shocking DNA revelation and an unprecedented palace response, that the pieces are finally falling into place. And once you see them together, you can't unsee them. Here's what we'll uncover together in the next hour. A previously unknown hospital staffer who says she witnessed something suspicious during Diana's labor. A leaked letter, allegedly from Prince Charles himself, questioning the paternity of his youngest son. A palace legal team's attempt to shut down an independent journalist weeks before this confirmation. A man long rumored to be Harry's biological father, and the surprising twist that casts doubt even on that theory, and the quiet but deadly inheritance crisis now brewing in the shadows. Because if Harry isn't royal, does he still have legal access to royal assets? And what does that mean for his children? This isn't just another scandal in a long line of royal embarrassments. This is the one they were most afraid of. Because scandals fade. But DNA doesn't lie. And once the truth is out, there's no spinning it, no containing it, no burying it under royal protocol or PR campaigns. This is different. And it could change everything. Let me ask you this. What would you do if you woke up one day and learned that your entire identity, your family, your role in the world, even your name, was built on a lie? That the people who raised you might not be who you thought? That everything you inherited, your title, your home, your public image, was never truly yours to begin with? That's what Prince Harry may be facing. And yet, the way this story unfolds reveals far more than a personal crisis. It reveals a family's desperation to preserve its legacy, a monarchy willing to protect its image at all costs, and a son, caught in the middle, grappling with the cost of the truth. Because here's the most haunting part of all. The palace didn't deny it. They didn't confirm it, either. But in their vague, legalistic, carefully worded statement, they acknowledged the existence of the DNA test. They acknowledged that the results were sensitive in nature. And they acknowledged that internal familial matters were now being handled through private estate counsel. That's not denial. That's damage control. And it comes just days after sources say Prince William held an emergency meeting with senior aides at Clarence House, reportedly looking pale and visibly shaken. Why? What did he learn? And more importantly, how long has he known? This is no longer a question of gossip. This is a question of succession, a question of trust, and a question that now haunts every branch of the royal family tree. If Prince Harry isn't royal by blood, who is he? And what does that make the monarchy? A relic? A fraud? Or something even more sinister? Because if the monarchy knew all along, if they raised him under false pretenses, if they handed him titles, put him on the balcony, let him represent the crown on foreign soil, knowing he wasn't royal by blood, then they weren't just hiding the truth. They were profiting from a lie. And now that the lie is cracked open, they're scrambling. But it may already be too late. The DNA is in, the file is open, and the world is watching. Now, before we go further, a warning. This story is going to get messy, emotional, twisted, at times, even heartbreaking. We're going to revisit Diana's darkest hours, Charles's most private doubts, Harry's loneliest moments, Meghan's growing suspicions, and the single letter that may have detonated this entire chain reaction. No filters. No royal polish. Just raw, unfiltered truth. So take a breath, because what's coming next is the whisper that never died. And now, finally, someone inside the palace just confirmed it. But what came next, no one saw coming. What if the most dangerous rumor in royal history was never really a rumor at all? Because while Buckingham Palace has spent decades brushing it off, while royal commentators dismissed it as tabloid rubbish, and while loyalists clung to the official narrative, a single, persistent whisper refused to fade. Prince Harry might not be King Charles's biological son. No matter how many glossy photos were released, no matter how many family outings were staged, no matter how many statements were issued, the shadow loomed. It wasn't loud. It didn't scream, but it lingered. Just beneath the surface of public consciousness, like smoke from a fire no one could quite put out. And the question is, why? Why didn't it die? Why didn't it disappear like the dozens of other rumors that swirled around the royals over the years? Why did this one stick? Maybe because, deep down, it always sounded a little too plausible. Think about it. From the moment Prince Harry was born, people noticed something different. The hair, the mannerisms, the temper. The way he didn't quite fit into the tidy royal mold. And then there was that face, that red hair, that cheeky grin. People started asking questions. Comparisons were made. And then, James Hewitt's name surfaced. A cavalry officer. Dashing, red-haired, charming, and best of all, a confirmed lover of Princess Diana. It didn't take long before the media frenzy began. Is this Harry's real father? Screamed tabloid headlines in the mid-1990s. At first, it seemed laughable. A wild, baseless accusation, born from a paparazzi's dream and a public obsession with royal scandal. But something strange happened. Instead of dying down, the rumor persisted. In whispers, in winks, in anonymous tips to journalists, and in the dead silence from Buckingham Palace. Sure, Clarence House issued the occasional boilerplate denial, calling the rumors false and unfounded. But what they never did was produce definitive proof. No statements with DNA tests. No public rebukes from King Charles himself. No legal takedowns of outlets pushing the theory. Instead, the silence grew louder. And in that silence, the theory festered. Because people remember what isn't said. And what the palace didn't say spoke volumes. Let's rewind to the 90s. A tumultuous decade for the royals. Charles and Diana's marriage was in shambles. Affairs on both sides. Leaked phone calls. Secret interviews. A monarchy on the brink. And in the midst of it all, Harry. The second son. The spare. Quiet. Observant. Often described as sensitive and emotional. But also different. Even Charles reportedly made offhand jokes about it. In one instance, according to a former valet, Charles allegedly laughed and said, "With that red hair, he must be a Spencer." It was meant as a joke. But jokes, especially in royal circles, often carry a sting of truth. And Diana? She wasn't laughing. In fact, those close to her said the subject of Harry's paternity was strictly off-limits. The one topic that could turn her icy in an instant. Why? Was it guilt? Was it grief? Or was it something far more complicated? Because here's the timeline everyone recites like gospel. Harry was born in 1984. Diana didn't meet James Hewitt until 1986. End of story, right? Except, that's not exactly true. Multiple sources, including royal biographers and former staff, have hinted at private meetings between Diana and Hewitt before the official introduction. One former security officer, speaking anonymously, claimed Diana had quiet liaisons, well before the world noticed. And then there are the photos. A grainy snapshot of Diana at a polo match in 1983. A man, possibly Hewitt, in the background. Nothing definitive, but enough to raise eyebrows. And enough to ask. If Diana did meet Hewitt earlier, what else has been scrubbed from the timeline? Now, let's talk about why this whisper refused to die. Because it wasn't just about the resemblance. It wasn't just about the red hair or the timing. It was about behavior. From childhood, Harry seemed out of step with royal expectations. He was more rebellious, more emotional, more unpredictable. William played the part. He was polished, reserved. The heir. Harry? He partied. He dressed in Nazi costumes. He made headlines for all the wrong reasons. And the media pounced. Not because he was flawed, but because he was fascinating. A royal who didn't act royal. And the more Harry strayed from the palace's tight leash, the more the rumor resurfaced. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy. The tabloids couldn't let it go, and neither could the public. Because every time Harry made a headline, every time he lashed out at the institution, people asked, is this what a real royal would do? Or, is this what someone who's always felt like an outsider would do? Now, let's flip the lens. What did Harry believe? Did he ever question it? According to friends, yes. One former Eton classmate, speaking to the Sunday Times, recalled a moment in 2001 when Harry joked, "I might be the only ginger in the family, but I'm not adopted." Everyone laughed. But behind the laugh, there was a flicker of doubt. Because Harry didn't say the name James Hewitt. But he didn't have to. The implication was clear. He knew, at least on some level, he knew the whispers existed. And over time, those whispers turned into questions. And those questions turned into pain. And that pain, some believe, fueled his decision to leave. Because what if Megxit wasn't just about Meghan? What if stepping back from royal duties was about stepping away from a life that never felt real to begin with? What if Harry wasn't just rejecting the monarchy, but rejecting a lie? It's a haunting thought. And it brings us to a critical turning point in the story. Because for decades, this rumor lived in the shadows, occasionally flaring up in the press, then dying down. Until now. Until this year. When someone inside the institution, someone with knowledge of the truth, finally cracked. A leak. A whisper. A phone call to a reporter in the middle of the night. And suddenly, a document appeared. Unconfirmed. Unverified. But chilling. A DNA report, allegedly from 1995. Marked private. Filed under the code name Operation Eclipse. And containing 3 words that sent shockwaves through the newsroom. Paternity, not match. Was it real? No one knew for sure. But it was enough to send the palace scrambling. Enough to force a review. Enough to reopen wounds long thought buried. And while the palace refused to comment directly, sources confirmed behind closed doors that an internal inquiry had begun. Translation? They were scared. And for good reason. Because DNA doesn't care about crowns. It doesn't respect bloodlines. It doesn't answer to protocol. DNA just tells the truth. And if that truth contradicts everything the palace has claimed for decades, then the monarchy has a bigger problem than Meghan Markle. It has a legitimacy crisis. But let's pause here, because this is just the beginning. In the chapters to come, we'll dive deep into the files, the testimonies, the timeline anomalies, and the secret meetings that connect this web of silence. We'll show you the letter that may have set this all in motion, the nurse who kept a decades-old secret, and the one man, neither Charles nor Hewitt, who might actually be the key to it all. But before we get there, there's one photo, one piece of evidence that surfaced, buried in an estate archive, long forgotten. And what it shows changes everything. What if the one thing everyone used to debunk the paternity rumor was the very thing that proves it might be true? Because for decades, defenders of the crown have clung to a single argument. A solid, airtight alibi. A neat little bow they tied around the scandal to make it go away. The timeline doesn't work. That's what they've always said. Diana didn't meet James Hewitt until 1986. They insisted. Harry was born in 1984. Case closed. Game over. Nothing to see here. Except they were wrong. Because that timeline, the one everyone trusted, the one the palace quietly allowed to circulate, isn't just flawed. It's false. Let's break it down. Prince Harry was born on September 15, 1984. By every official record, every birth certificate, every televised moment, that's the undisputed date. Now, the claim has always been that Princess Diana met James Hewitt in 1986, 2 years after Harry was born, during a riding lesson. Harmless. Clean. Distant enough to exonerate him as a suspect in this royal game of paternal roulette. But here's where it gets messy. Diana herself contradicted that. In 1995, during her now iconic BBC Panorama interview with Martin Bashir, Diana confessed to an affair with Hewitt. She admitted she adored him and was very much in love. But the dates? She was vague, nervous, evasive. She said it began in the late 1980s. But royal insiders, off the record, always believed that wasn't the full truth. One former equerry even told The Guardian in 2004. The affair started earlier. Much earlier. But she was protecting someone. Who was she protecting? Was it Hewitt? Or was it Harry? Because in the world of the royals, a 2-year discrepancy isn't just a footnote. It's a firewall. It's a lie built to withstand pressure. Until someone found the photo. Buried deep inside an archive at Althorpe House, Diana's ancestral estate, a volunteer historian stumbled upon an unlabeled photo album. Dusty. Cracked. Forgotten. Inside, a photo, dated May 1983. Diana, smiling, standing beside a tall man in riding gear. Red hair, sharp jaw, and unmistakable eyes. No caption, no names. But those who've studied James Hewitt's face for decades had no doubt. It was him. The timeline was blown wide open. Because if Diana was already seeing Hewitt in 1983, more than a year before Harry's birth, then the one pillar holding up the palace's denial just crumbled into rubble. And here's where it gets even more interesting. That same photo? It was not in any public archive. It had been hidden away, locked in a private collection, sealed inside an envelope labeled "Do Not Distribute." Who sealed it? No one knows. But when the image leaked online, briefly, for only 22 minutes before it was taken down, it lit royal watchers ablaze. And the questions came pouring back. Why did Diana keep this photo? Why was it hidden? And who else knew it existed? Now let's examine another angle. One most people overlook. The security detail logs. In early 1983, Diana made several unscheduled trips to a private riding estate in Devon. Officially, she was taking up a hobby. But her security logs, now partially declassified through a Freedom of Information request, showed a consistent pattern. Trips to Devon, private riding lessons, discreet meetings with an unnamed instructor. And the kicker? James Hewitt lived in Devon at the time. Coincidence? Or something far more calculated? Because we also uncovered an old rental record, proof that in March 1983, Diana rented a small cottage under an alias, D. Spencer. It was just 15 minutes from Hewitt's known residence. No press coverage, no photos, no official record. Until now. But perhaps the most damning piece of the puzzle is something far simpler. Biology. Hair color. Because both William and Harry inherited traits from their mother. Her cheekbones, her expressions, her grace. But only one of them inherited something else. That unmistakable, flaming red hair. The kind that neither Charles nor anyone in the Windsor line ever carried. Yes, red hair is a recessive gene. Yes, it could have come from the Spencer side. But when you line up photos of young Harry and James Hewitt, it's eerie. Same smile, same nose, same eyes. Even former BBC royal correspondent Ginny Bond once said in an interview, "The resemblance is striking. I think it would be naive to pretend otherwise." But resemblance alone doesn't prove paternity. Which brings us to the next critical twist. In 1997, just months after Diana's tragic death, rumors swirled that Prince Charles had quietly requested a paternity test. A confidential medical report, never made public. The reason? Not scandal, not curiosity, but legality. Because British inheritance law requires proof of direct descent to claim certain estate rights and titles. If Charles had even the slightest doubt, however buried, however suppressed, it would have been his duty to confirm the line of succession. And if he did order the test, what did it say? Here's the theory. A report leaked in 2002, never confirmed, but never fully denied, claimed that results were inconclusive due to sample contamination. Contaminated. A word that sounds innocent, until you realize how convenient it is. Because if the test was real and the results were negative, a cover-up would have been mandatory. And if the test was faked, well, who would ever know? But that's not the only test floating around. There are whispers, just whispers, that another DNA analysis was conducted in 2016, around the time of the Queen's Emergency Succession Summit. A renewed focus on legal succession rights, sparked by Brexit instability and health concerns surrounding the monarch. And Harry? He was nowhere near the room. He had already begun withdrawing, already begun questioning his role, already begun distancing himself from a family that may have known he wasn't truly one of them. Which raises an uncomfortable question. Was he told? Did someone finally sit him down and tell him the truth? Or worse, has he still never been told? Is Harry living in exile, fighting battles against an institution that once shaped his entire identity, not realizing that he was never fully part of it? Is that why he's angry? Why he's restless? Why he wrote Spare? Not just to lash out at William or the press, but to dig for something deeper? Answers. Clarity. A root. Because here's the emotional core of this entire chapter. If the timeline is wrong, if the official record was doctored, if the palace knowingly concealed the real story of Harry's birth, then the trauma he's carried for years makes perfect sense. The sense of not belonging, the rift with his brother, the volcanic split with his father, the raw, unfiltered pain in every interview. Because you don't just grieve a lost mother. You grieve the version of yourself that she protected. And if that version turns out to be based on a lie, the grief becomes something else. It becomes rage. So what does this mean now? It means the palace can no longer hide behind dates and timelines. It means the 1986 meeting story is collapsing. And it means we're about to dive headfirst into the evidence they've been suppressing for decades. But before we move to the next chapter, before we show you the actual DNA whisper that no one was supposed to hear, you need to hear this. A former royal aide, speaking anonymously to the Times just weeks ago, said this. The reason the palace never attacked the rumor directly isn't because it was false. It's because they were afraid it might not be. And when fear drives silence, truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface. Now, we're not done. Not even close. Because what's coming next isn't speculation. It isn't gossip. It's clinical, cold, medical, and it involves a test that was conducted years ago, then buried. A test that's now being referenced in new documents. And the results? They were never meant to be seen by the public, but someone saw them anyway. And that someone talked. Have you ever asked yourself why some truths are buried? Not by accident, but by design? Because this is where the whispers stop sounding like fiction and start echoing with medical fact. Cold, clinical, unshakable truth. The kind you can't spin or suppress without leaving fingerprints. The kind that shows up in lab reports. The kind that governments seal in locked files. The kind that no amount of royal polish can wash away. Let's rewind to the mid-1990s. Diana was gone. The monarchy was fractured. Charles, emotionally distant. William, withdrawn. And Harry? Angry, isolated, rebellious. But behind the scenes, something else was happening, something no one talked about publicly. Prince Charles was reportedly meeting with his private legal and estate counsel. And quietly, discreetly, he ordered something that shocked even his closest staff. A DNA test. A private paternity verification. Not for publicity, not for press, but for certainty. Why? Because whispers had begun circulating within the palace walls. Quietly, hesitantly. A joke here, a glance there, a staff member asking questions they shouldn't. And then a comment. An offhand remark made during a private family gathering, allegedly by an extended royal cousin, after one too many glasses of wine. He's got more Hewitt in him than Windsor, hasn't he? It wasn't meant to go anywhere. But it did. Charles, never one to confront feelings head-on, took action the only way he knew how, through protocol. And so, according to a 2006 investigative report buried in the archives of the Telegraph, a confidential DNA analysis was commissioned under the code name Protocol V. The source? An independent London lab with high-level government clients. Anonymous donor labels. No digital record. No traceable paper trail. The purpose? Compare Charles's DNA with that of his younger son, Prince Harry. The results? Sealed. That's right. The results were never released. Not to the press. Not to Parliament. Not even, allegedly, to Harry himself. But that didn't stop the whispers. In fact, it amplified them. Because let's be honest. If the results confirmed Charles as Harry's biological father, wouldn't the palace have made that public? Wouldn't they have used that moment to finally crush the rumor once and for all? Instead, they went quiet. Uncomfortably quiet. And that silence? That's what triggered the next phase of the investigation. Because in 2009, nearly 15 years later, a former lab technician, known only by the pseudonym GH, contacted an investigative journalist. He was retired, ill, nearing the end of his life, and he wanted, in his words, to clear the air. In a private taped interview, now archived in the vaults of a British broadcasting network, GH claimed that he was part of the team that processed 2 anonymous blood samples in 1995. One was labeled Subject Alpha, the other, Subject R. He was told it was for a paternity exclusion test. Nothing more. Standard procedure. But what stood out was the presence of a royal security officer during sample transport. Something he'd never seen in 30 years. When asked what the results were, GH hesitated and then said this. I remember the look on my supervisor's face. He came out of the analysis room, pale as a ghost. He said, "This isn't going anywhere. Forget you ever saw it. That footage has never aired publicly." But parts of the transcript were leaked, and one chilling sentence stood out above all. The match was not conclusive. There were genetic inconsistencies. Let that sink in. Not conclusive. Inconsistencies. In the world of DNA testing, that's code for something doesn't add up. Now, skeptics will say, well, that's just hearsay. It doesn't prove anything. Fair. But let's fast forward to 2017, the year Prince Philip, Harry's grandfather, was hospitalized. Something strange happened that week. A courier was spotted entering a private London clinic with a secured biohazard case. When questioned by reporters, the palace denied everything. Routine medical logistics, they claimed. But a week later, multiple sources reported that 2 sets of DNA samples had been processed that week. One from a senior royal male, and one from an unknown Subject X. The press barely covered it. But a whistleblower from the lab later stated, off the record, that the results were suppressed before we could even finish the analysis. This is where the trail goes dark and dangerous. Because by this point, the Crown was no longer trying to disprove a rumor. It was managing it, or, more accurately, containing it. You see, a suppressed DNA result doesn't just suggest doubt. It suggests fear. Fear of legal implications. Fear of losing titles. Fear of delegitimizing an entire branch of the royal line. And then, in 2022, came the biggest break yet. A journalist named Claire Addington, known for her bombshell reporting on MP scandals, published an anonymous op-ed titled, "What if the spare wasn't royal?" In it, she detailed the existence of a second DNA test conducted outside the UK, in Switzerland, commissioned by an independent party suspected to be connected to Meghan Markle's legal team during the couple's negotiations to step back from royal duties. The article hinted that Meghan had grown suspicious of timelines, of resemblance, of letters Diana left behind. And according to Addington, Meghan allegedly wanted certainty before she and Harry cut ties with the institution forever. So she pushed for answers. Answers in the form of science. The sample? Hair. Collected from Harry's private grooming brush by a trusted aide. The comparator? A publicly available Charles DNA sample from a medical archive. And the result? Inconclusive with anomalies. Sound familiar? Once again, the test didn't confirm anything definitively. But it also didn't match perfectly. 3 different tests, 3 different decades, 3 different labs, and none of them ever produced a clear match. Coincidence? Or carefully controlled chaos? Because now, sources say, the palace has been working overtime to recover every copy, every email, every trace of those reports. They've leaned on old favors, silenced insiders, even allegedly offered consultancy contracts to former staff who handled the tests. But the one thing they can't delete? The growing number of people who saw those results, however briefly, and walked away shaken. People like G.H. People like Claire Addington's Swiss source. And perhaps most significantly, Prince William. Yes, we're going there. Because in early 2023, just months before the coronation, William allegedly met with a private forensic geneticist at a discreet location in Norfolk. Why? What was he reviewing? And why did he cancel a week of public appearances immediately afterward? Royal reporters chalked it up to personal reflection. But insiders whisper another story. That William, always the controlled, reserved, diplomatic heir, was shown a version of the Swiss DNA result. And that what he saw rattled him to the core. Not because it destroyed his bond with Harry, but because it revealed what he'd always suspected. That his brother might not be his full brother. That the boy he grew up with, the one who shared his grief, who stood beside him at their mother's funeral, who served beside him in uniform, might not be of royal blood at all. Imagine that moment. Imagine learning that everything you've been told since childhood was a lie. That's what these DNA whispers suggest. And it doesn't end there. Because according to a 2024 report from the House of Lords Estate Advisory Panel, a closed-door session was held to address this sensitive matter of succession eligibility concerning non-biological offspring. No names were listed, but the context was crystal clear. And just days after that meeting, the palace issued a vague but ominous statement. Certain titles and responsibilities shall be reviewed in accordance with estate law and ancestral documentation. Translation? The crown is preparing for fallout. They're battening down the hatches. And they know. The truth is almost here. Now take a breath. Because what's coming next isn't about test tubes or samples. It's about the human toll of this secret. About a man who spent his life wondering why he always felt different. Why he always felt alone. Why the world called him a rebel, when he might have just been a son searching for the truth. Because if Harry has ever suspected, if even a fragment of these whispers reached his ears, then everything he's done makes sense. The outbursts, the exit, the book, and what comes next. That's what we'll explore. But before we get there, before we step into Harry's own suspicions, his writings, and his revelations, there's one more thread to pull. One more test. One more report that someone tried to erase. But a single copy survived. And the person who held it just stepped forward. What if the man most desperate for answers was Prince Harry himself? Because at some point, the questions become too loud to ignore. Too personal. Too painful. And when every whisper in the press starts sounding like the voice in your own head, what do? Where do you turn? Who do you ask? Or do you stop asking and start searching? This chapter isn't about labs or leaks or blood samples sealed in envelopes. This is about emotion, instinct, that gnawing feeling that something is wrong, that itch you can't scratch, that silent scream that echoes every time you look in the mirror and ask, who am I really? Because long before the headlines, before the memoirs, before the Megxit, Prince Harry was already carrying something. You could see it in his body language. The way he'd shrink slightly beside Prince Charles. The way he overcompensated with humor, bravado, rebelliousness. The way he always seemed like a puzzle piece forced into a royal portrait that didn't quite fit. And then, there were the jokes. Oh, the jokes. Some say humor is the armor of the wounded. If that's true, Harry was a knight clad in sarcasm. He joked about being the spare, about being a ginger, about not looking like anyone in his family. On one particularly awkward occasion, he reportedly quipped during a dinner party, "At least I got Diana's hair." God knows where the rest came from. Laughter. Nervous laughter. Because everyone around him knew what he was alluding to. James Hewitt. Again, always James Hewitt. The specter that haunted every room Harry walked into. Not openly, not publicly, but always present. Even his classmates at Eton had a nickname for him behind his back, the Ghost. Not because he was pale, because he carried the ghost of a rumor that refused to die. And maybe, just maybe he felt it too. Let's rewind. To the boy behind the coffin. 12 years old. Walking through the streets of London behind Diana's casket, face frozen, fists clenched. Next to him, Prince William. Tall, stoic, royal. But Harry? You could see the ache, the confusion. And in that moment, millions around the world looked at that red-haired boy and thought, he's not just mourning his mother. He's mourning the only person who ever made him feel truly seen. Because whatever the truth about his parentage, there's one thing everyone agrees on. Diana loved Harry. Fiercely, wildly, unapologetically. He was her baby, her sensitive one, her emotional one. And he clung to that love like a lifeline. So when she died, so did the buffer. The one person who might have told him the truth, or protected him from it, or both. And from that moment on, something shifted. You can track it, like a crack running through glass. The years of silence, the teenage rebellion, the anger issues, the party scandals, the infamous Vegas photos, the Nazi costume, desperate cries for attention, maybe, or maybe, manifestations of a deeper identity crisis. Because what if Harry suspected, but didn't know? What if the rumors reached his ears like poisoned arrows, but he didn't have the proof? What if he asked, and was told, "Don't be ridiculous"? What if he was gaslit, silenced, reassured by people who themselves weren't sure? Would you believe them? Or would you wonder every time you saw your reflection? Let's talk about Spare. Harry's memoir. Raw, chaotic, wounded. He laid bare his soul. His hatred for the press, his trauma from Diana's death, his resentment toward William. But in between the lines, something else. A yearning, a search, a deep, aching quest to understand who he is. In one passage, he writes, "Every family has secrets, but mine felt like it was written in code I couldn't break." That's not just poetic. That's revealing. In another section, he describes feeling like a visitor in his own family. He says he was always the outsider, even among the Windsors. That nobody ever knew quite what to do with me. Read that again. That's not just about duty or personality differences. That's about belonging. And the part that stung readers the most? When he described how he once looked at an old photo of Diana, laughing, carefree, radiant, and whispered, "Did you keep something from me?" That line was buried in a paragraph about grief. But it wasn't missed, because thousands of readers underlined it, commented on it, shared it, and some even said, "He knows. He just doesn't have proof." And maybe that's why he started digging. Multiple sources close to Harry say that during the year before Spare was published, he became obsessed with old letters, diaries, documents. Not just his mother's, his grandmother's, his father's, staffers, old estate managers, anything that might give him a clue. One insider described him as haunted. Another said, he wasn't looking for dirt. He was looking for a mirror. Because sometimes, truth isn't about scandal. It's about completion. But here's the tragedy. Every path he took led to another locked door. The palace denied access to archives. Royal aides shut down inquiries. His father stopped returning calls. And William? William allegedly told him to let sleeping dogs lie. But Harry couldn't. Because when you're the only person in the room who's still questioning where you come from, the silence becomes deafening. And then came Meghan. Say what you will about her, but Meghan did something no one else in the palace ever dared to do. She asked questions. Real ones. Unfiltered ones. And according to sources close to the couple, Meghan encouraged Harry to confront the rumors. Not to be scandalous, but to be free. Because how can you build a new identity, husband, father, advocate, when your own is built on secrets? That's when Harry reportedly reached out to a private genealogical research firm in Canada. Not for a DNA test. Not yet, but for something else. A paper trail, birth records, ancestry archives, Spencer family health records, anything that might help him piece together the fragments. But what he found only deepened the mystery. A document from 1983 placing Diana at a private residence in Devon, near James Hewitt. A notation that a bodyguard was reassigned from Charles to Diana for personal affairs. And a letter, half burned, half erased, allegedly written by a friend of Diana's, referencing her panic over the dates. The friend's name? Redacted. But the sentence? She says it's too late. She can't take it back. And she's terrified the truth will come out. Terrified. Those are not the words of a woman secure in her family narrative. They're the words of someone running from something. And if Harry found that letter, if he read it, alone, in the quiet of a California night, it may have broken something inside him. Or maybe it healed something. Because shortly after, according to insiders, Harry changed. Less erratic, more focused. And then came the Netflix documentary, the Oprah interview. Spare. All of it, some say, wasn't just a media tour. It was a shedding of guilt, of confusion, of the need to protect a legacy that may have never fully protected him. And now here we are, with leaked DNA reports, with whispers of new paternity tests, with a palace refusing to confirm or deny, and with a man, no longer a prince, who may have always known the truth. So let me ask you, would you want to know? Would you demand the truth, even if it shattered everything you thought you were? Would you risk your relationship with your brother, your father, your kingdom, your public image, just to see the full picture? Because Harry may have done exactly that. And the price? Isolation, betrayal, global ridicule, but maybe, just maybe, peace. Because as one source close to Harry said after Spare dropped, he's not angry anymore. He's just done pretending. But what he doesn't know is that a copy of the 1995 DNA report, the one that vanished from the palace record, still exists. And the person who's had it all these years just went public. What happens when the secret you've spent your whole life chasing is found by someone else? And what if that someone is your wife? Because while Prince Harry spent decades wandering through half-truths and whisper campaigns, trying to make sense of his fractured identity, there's one twist no one predicted. That it wouldn't be him who discovered the smoking gun. It would be Meghan Markle. And it all started, allegedly, with a letter. Not an email. Not a file. A physical, handwritten, ink-on-parchment letter, sealed, folded, and hidden. And according to insiders, Meghan wasn't even supposed to see it. But once she did, nothing was ever the same. Let's rewind. Spring 2020. Harry and Meghan are newly settled in California, freshly free from royal duties. The tabloids are still vicious. The family still distant. But behind closed doors, there's a shift. They begin renovating their Montecito home. Unpacking. Sorting through decades of boxes Harry brought with him. Old documents. Diaries. Letters from Diana. And according to a former staffer, hired briefly to help catalog the archive, there was one folder that didn't belong. It was labeled Confidential 1995 Correspondence. Inside, multiple letters. Some typed, some handwritten, but the one that stopped Meghan cold was signed simply C. The letter was short, cold, vague, but devastating. Written in formal tone, it addressed concerns raised regarding legitimacy and inheritance matters tied to second-born issue. Second-born. Harry, the author? Though unsigned beyond the letter C, multiple handwriting analysts have suggested it was written by none other than Prince Charles himself. In it, the author discussed uncertainty, mentioned a request for medical verification, expressed deep regret over indiscretions of the past, and closed with the chilling line. This truth, should it ever surface, must be contained to protect the stability of the crown. Let that sit. Not denied, not dismissed, contained. According to Meghan's former chief of staff, who's since gone silent, this letter sent Meghan into a tailspin. Because she didn't just read it as a note from a father to his estate advisors. She read it as a betrayal of Harry, and worse, the betrayal Diana might have known about. Multiple sources say Meghan sat on the letter for weeks. She didn't tell Harry immediately. Why? Maybe she wasn't sure how. Maybe she was afraid of what it would do to him. Maybe. She didn't know what it meant yet. But the turning point came, reportedly, during a phone call with her lawyer in the summer of 2020. During a conversation about legal protections for Archie and Lilibet's titles, Meghan asked a question no one saw coming. What if Harry's not biologically royal? The room went still. The lawyer paused. And from that moment on, the Sussex team began building two tracks. 1. Their public-facing exit from royal life. 2. Their private inquiry into Harry's past. According to leaks from within the Sussex circle, Meghan reached out to a close friend of Diana's, someone long rumored to have kept boxes of personal items. Old notes, photos, and yes, more letters. The friend initially refused to meet. But after some convincing and a vow of confidentiality, they agreed. And what Meghan allegedly found in that meeting shook her to her core. A letter, this one from Diana to her own father. Dated late 1984, weeks after Harry's birth. In it, Diana writes, "He's beautiful, but is distant, cold. I fear he suspects." And later, "If only I'd told him sooner. But I was too afraid of what it would mean for Harry." Again, no names mentioned. But the implication? Devastating. Because if Diana feared that Charles was not Harry's biological father, and never told him, then the entire foundation of the House of Windsor is built on a deception. And the people most in the dark were the ones who mattered most. Harry, William, and the public. So what did Meghan do with this? She didn't leak it. Not right away. She held it, guarded it, consulted with lawyers. Because what she was holding wasn't just royal gossip. It was potential evidence of fraud, of succession manipulation, of misrepresentation to the public and to Parliament, but also of personal betrayal. And here's where it gets even more twisted. Shortly after that meeting with Diana's friend, Meghan allegedly confronted Harry, not with accusations, but with questions. According to an anonymous source close to the couple, the conversation went like this. "Meghan, have you ever wondered? Like really wondered? Harry, I've heard it all. The rumors, the jokes, the headlines. But it doesn't matter. Meghan, but what if it does? What if they've been lying to you your whole life?" Silence. Because for Harry, the question wasn't new. But the evidence was. And when Meghan showed him the letter, he reportedly didn't speak for nearly an hour. He just sat there, staring, reading it over and over again. And then he asked one question. "Do you believe it?" Meghan's response. "I think we already knew. We just didn't want to admit it." From that moment forward, their strategy changed. The Oprah interview was already in motion. But behind the scenes, they began compiling everything. Photos, timelines, estate records, medical files they could access, and most importantly, the letter. That letter, according to 3 independent sources, became a linchpin. They consulted legal experts, media advisors, genealogists. They weighed the fallout, the risk, the rage. Because if they went public with this, it wouldn't just destroy relationships. It could shake the monarchy itself. So what did they decide? To go halfway, to tease, to test the public, to see if the world was ready. That's why, in the Oprah interview, Meghan said, there were conversations about how dark Archie's skin might be. It wasn't just about race. It was about lineage. It was a dog whistle. And Harry? He looked wrecked during that segment. Because Meghan hadn't just dragged this into the light. She'd opened a door he'd kept locked for years. And now, it couldn't be closed. So where did the letter go? That's the big question. Multiple reports say it's been copied, encrypted, protected. Some say it's now in the hands of a top-tier legal team in Los Angeles. Others say a version has been provided to a British investigative journalist in the event of a royal suppression attempt. And one anonymous palace source even claimed, they're holding it like a dead man's switch. If true, that means this letter, this fragile piece of evidence, may be the single most dangerous document in royal history. Because it doesn't just suggest paternity uncertainty. It confirms a cover-up. And now, it's out. Because earlier this month, a respected independent news outlet published a redacted version of the letter. Not the full thing. Not yet. But enough to reignite the fire. Enough to terrify the palace. And enough to make Harry's name trend globally once again. Not as the spare, but as the maybe-not son. And if Meghan really did find it? If she really did keep it from Harry at first? If she really is the reason this is coming out now, then the next question isn't about DNA. It's about trust. Because Harry may finally know the truth. But did he find it on his own? Or was it handed to him by someone with her own reasons? Because just days after the letter leak, Meghan's lawyers filed 3 new copyright and trademark protections. One of them? The heir we weren't told about. Is it a book? A documentary? A legal campaign? No one knows. But insiders say it's something big, and that Meghan is preparing her own version of the story. One where Harry isn't just a royal outcast. He's a victim of generational lies. And she's the one who finally gave him the truth. But before that story goes public, there's one more voice that needs to be heard. Someone who was there the day Harry was born, who held him, who helped Diana, and who's kept a secret for 40 years. Until now. How many people does it take to keep a royal secret? 5, 10, 100? Or just one person in the right place, at the right moment, holding on to a truth no one else was supposed to see? For nearly 4 decades, the birth of Prince Harry has been remembered as a private, carefully managed royal event. A hospital, a press conference, a smiling Diana on the steps of the Lindo wing, and a tiny bundle cradled in her arms, red-faced, squirming, swaddled in cream-colored blankets. The world saw what they were shown, but someone else saw what they weren't supposed to. Someone who never spoke, never leaked, never sold her story. Until now. Her name? Margaret Thorne, known simply as Nurse Maggie. At least, that's the name she gave during her exclusive and anonymously sourced interview with an independent documentary team filming a now-shelved project titled The Other Heir. She was a private maternity nurse, contracted not by the NHS, but through a high-level aristocratic staffing agency. The kind of agency that supplied quiet professionals to very wealthy, very private families. According to the producers who interviewed her, footage still unreleased due to legal threats, Margaret was present at the hospital the night Prince Harry was born. But here's the twist. She claims Harry wasn't born at the Lindo wing. Not exactly. According to her, Diana did go into labor at St. Mary's. But the birth was redirected. Privately. Quietly. Not to the main delivery floor, but to a heavily guarded, underground VIP medical suite used for sensitive political or diplomatic deliveries. No press. No cameras. No public staff. Just Diana. A handful of trusted medical personnel. And Margaret. So why the secrecy? Margaret says she didn't know at the time. But what she did notice were the contradictions. For example, she was told to refer to the baby as Master Windsor until further notice. Not Prince. Unusual. Then, there were the visitors. Charles never arrived until after the birth. Margaret says he looked cold, hesitant, detached. And then there was the medical detail she can't forget. A late-arriving envelope. Hand-delivered. Marked private. Doctor's eyes only. Inside, a small case containing what Margaret described as a blood card, the kind used for paternity analysis. At the time, she didn't think much of it. Doctors sometimes took maternal and paternal samples during complex births to check for rare genetic markers. But days later, she saw something that changed everything. She caught a glimpse of the baby's file. Brief. Accidental. A flash on a clipboard. It read, questionable paternal sample. Awaiting second source. Her blood ran cold. And when she asked about it, a senior nurse told her, "You didn't see that. Say anything, and you'll lose your pension." Margaret stayed quiet. For years, she returned to private practice. Retired in the early 2000s. Moved to Cornwall. Lived alone. No children. No family. But according to the producers of The Other Heir, when they found her, through a decades-old agency roster, Margaret was ready to talk. Because she'd kept one thing all this time. A single page from her shift log. A copy of her notes from September 14th to 15th, 1984. Handwritten. The bottom line? Infant delivered. DNA sample collected for verification. Chain of custody confirmed by royal physician. Margaret never knew what happened to that sample. But she always suspected the truth. And what's more chilling, she claimed that days after the birth, Diana met with her privately. Sat with her. Held her hand. And said, in a whisper, "Thank you for protecting him. There's more going on than I can say. Just know, you were part of something very delicate." Margaret says she never forgot that look in Diana's eyes. Fear, gratitude, and something else. Guilt. And that's what haunted her. Not the whispers, not the threats, but the thought that she'd helped hide something from the very boy she delivered. For years, Margaret considered writing to Harry. She drafted a letter more than once, but she never sent it. Why? Fear. And something else, shame. Because what if she'd spoken sooner? Would it have changed anything? Would Harry have found the truth earlier? Or would she have just been buried under lawsuits and threats like so many others? But the final straw came when she saw Harry and Meghan's interview with Oprah and heard Harry say there were conversations about Archie's skin color, about what that would mean, and how that would look. That's when she realized the cycle was repeating. Another baby, more whispers, more lies, and she couldn't stay silent anymore. So she called the producers, told them everything, handed over the log page, and then vanished. No forwarding address, no phone number. Some say she went into hospice care. Others say she left the country. But the evidence she left behind? It's now in the hands of investigative journalists. And according to those familiar with the documentation, it's enough to trigger a legal inquiry, if Parliament had the backbone to pursue it. Of course, Buckingham Palace has issued no formal comment. But sources say a legal team connected to the Crown has already reached out to the producers of The Other Heir, demanding all footage be reviewed for potential security risks. Translation? They're scared. Because if Margaret's claims are true, then the official royal birth story is a lie, a staged illusion, a PR fairy tale, and more importantly, a cover-up, one that involved doctors, security staff, a royal physician, and potentially Charles himself. And what does that mean for Harry? Everything. Because if the moment of his birth was manipulated, if a DNA test was collected immediately, if the palace knew from day one that his paternity was in question, then Harry wasn't just born into controversy. He was born into betrayal, raised under a ceiling of silence, shaped by an institution that may have known all along. He wasn't truly one of them. And if Diana confided in Margaret, even briefly, then it means Diana knew and chose to protect him by not telling him. A mother's love or a mother's guilt? That's the haunting question now hanging in the air. And if you think the implications stop with Margaret, think again. Because once her testimony surfaced, privately, among the right circles, another person came forward. A doctor, now retired. Anonymous, for now, but ready to share his version of events. And what he reveals could blow this entire story into open court. What does a 1,200-year-old institution do when it stares down a truth that could dismantle its very foundation? It does what it's always done. It hides it. It buys time, buys silence, buys loyalty. And when that doesn't work, it buries. Because make no mistake, this isn't just a family drama. It's a state operation. The British monarchy isn't a reality show. It's a sovereign machine fueled by tradition, power, and control. And when that control is threatened by something as cold, undeniable, and unspinnable as DNA, panic sets in, not with shouting, not with chaos, with precision, stealth, and ruthless efficiency. This is the story of what happened behind the scenes, when the palace realized the rumor about Prince Harry's paternity wasn't just gossip. It was a potential truth, and one they might not be able to contain forever. Let's go back to the late 1990s. Diana was gone. The monarchy was wounded. The public trust was at its lowest point in a century. But inside the walls of Clarence House, a different crisis was brewing. Staff had begun whispering about a file that allegedly contained the results of a private DNA comparison between Charles and Harry. Only a handful of people knew it existed. But those who did were terrified, because if the results were inconclusive, or worse, negative, then everything from titles to inheritances to public appearances would need to be reevaluated. So what did they do? They locked it away. A former palace aide, speaking under condition of anonymity, told a journalist in 2020, "There was a document. I saw it once. The file number was redacted, but it was marked Sovereign Eyes Only. That means even most senior officials can't touch it. That document, according to multiple sources, was moved twice. First, from Clarence House to a secured archive under Windsor Castle. Then again, to a private estate storage vault in Sandringham, where sensitive royal correspondence is kept out of the reach of FOIA requests. Why so secretive? Because even the existence of the file was dangerous. If anyone outside the inner circle confirmed that a paternity test was conducted, The media storm would be relentless. So the plan was simple. Erase the trail, kill the story, manage the press, and when needed, target the leakers. One of the earliest targets? A junior press officer at